Well, I'm very pleased to say that we can now speak to a man who knows all about playing for the Lions. Former captain Sam Warburton joins us live now. Sam, good to speak to you. Just how special is the Lions tour as a player?
It's the pinnacle. Boy, I've aged a little bit since then. Mine, that was 10 years ago, some of that footage. The Lions is the one where it's actually still quite a surreal thing for myself. You have to pinch yourself when you consider the massive players that you have to try and bypass to get into that Test 15. It is the pinnacle. And what's lovely when you get there as well is how in awe of the Lions that every player is. Everybody is so desperate to get on that tour. And I've always spoken very highly and really fought for Lions tours. I think it would be an absolute disaster if the Lions was not going to continue, which is why I'm so glad that the powers to be have cemented it in the rugby calendar. But from a player's perspective, it's an absolutely enormous privilege. It is the pinnacle of what you can do in your sport. And we just looked at some images from 2017 where we drew the series out in New Zealand. A lot of pressure, but it's absolutely worth it. And I urge any young aspiring player to do the same.
Yeah, you got that famous draw in New Zealand. You won away in Australia. Do you have any particular standout moments from those tours?
I didn't realise it at the time, but in 2017, when we played New Zealand, I believed, well, they were back-to-back world champions in 2011, 2015. We went out there, as you can see now, in 2017, and nobody gave us a chance. I think maybe some people who were optimistic would have thought we could have potentially won one of the three tests. As a group, we believed we were going to win, and we obviously drew. It was one apiece to start, and we drew in dramatic style the third test. But considering they hadn't lost at home for 42 games, I didn't realise that statistic at the time. But now, as time goes on, I realise it was a success. And it was a really proud moment. This you're seeing this is probably one of the most iconic images of sport, probably in the sort of professional era of rugby in particular. And it's a really nice moment that on the field, it's a brutal contact sport, but off it, you have utmost respect for each other. So I look back in 2017, very proud to be part of that moment in the third test against the All Blacks, which is one of the greatest All Blacks teams they've been. So I look back now with fond memories.
Yeah, you said it was a really iconic shot. Is that the kind of thing that makes this type of series so unique?
I think so. I'm not sure what other sports you would get, across the world where you get 30,000 plus traveling fans. And in Australia, for example, there's been conversations about in 2025 hosting it in certain cities, and some cities don't have 30,000 hotel beds to be able to accommodate the massive Lions fans that are going to go over. It's an absolute frenzy out there, but it's phenomenal. So it is one of those one-off special tours that you get in sport. And I think that the way that rugby players, it is tough. I finished at 28. That was my last game that I played in those shots just then. I was 28 years of age, didn't play from that moment onwards. It's a very tough sport to play, but the respect that the players have for each other, the way that the fans can mingle with each other and celebrate, it's not as hostile as maybe some sports that we see, when you get real big rivalries in football, perhaps. It's a very good, friendly atmosphere, even though it's a brutal combat sport. A lot of respect between players and fans.
Yeah, and just take us back to Australia 2013 as well, a pretty dramatic series. How much did you enjoy your time out there then?
Well, that was a baptism of fire for me. I was only 24 years of age as captain for the Lions. It was my first tour, so I didn't know what to expect. But I was so lucky that on that tour, and this is where it's great, even though it was the highest pressure from a captaincy perspective you'll go through and the highest profile event, it's actually the easiest role as a captain. On that tour, you got the likes of Paul O'Connell, Brian O'Driscoll, and you think it's going to be quite daunting going into a room with all these people, but because everybody puts the Lions first, you pick good people, which is very important. In rugby, there's no egos when you're playing for the Lions. Nobody's bigger than the Lions, and those players helped me an enormous amount, considering that they were 10 years my senior. Really hard-working group of people that play for the Lions. So when the selectors pick teams, they obviously pick good players, but you've got to pick good people at the same time, which is why it's a concept that should never work, bringing four countries together. And 3 months before, we've just been knocking bells out of each other in the Six Nations. But you put all those rivalries to one side to put the Lions badge first, because the history of the Lions is just phenomenal. And when you're there, everybody just buys into it. And it's such a great experience.
Yeah, and the fans really buy into it as well. We saw the Lions losing away in South Africa during the pandemic in 2021. How important are the fans for this series?
You make a very good point. I felt a little bit sorry for some of the players who are on their first tour in 2021, and most players only go on one tour. You know, you're lucky if you go on two, never mind three. Very minority of players go on three or more tours, given how tough it is for selection. But I thought those guys didn't experience a true Lions tour. Now, I'm not just saying this, but I think Australia is arguably one of the best tours, if not the best tour to go on, because when the rugby's on, it's rugby fever. But the great thing about Australia is the climate is good that time of year. Even though it's their winter, it's still really good weather. You've got the phenomenal cities the tests are in, which are going to be both in Melbourne, 2 tests in Melbourne. I believe the final penultimate test is in Sydney. And there's so much to do in Australia. It's a phenomenal place to go. Whereas in New Zealand, great rugby country, but it can be quite rainy. But the Australian climate, and you can actually escape the bubble of rugby as well, because there's many sports going on in Australia. So it's a phenomenal tour to go on. But the fact that fans can be back, they can enjoy it. There's players, you walk into a foyer full of hundreds of people, and you're getting asked for photos from myself as a Welshman, English, Irish, and Scotsman, and women. You know, it's a real surreal thing. It's nice. So it's one of those things. I urge any fan, and any fan who's been on a Lions tour can testify to this. It's a once in a lifetime unique experience to go on, and it's great. Sky are covering it. Sky have covered the Lions tours now for so many years. I was privileged to be part of it 2 years ago as a broadcaster, and they do such a phenomenal job, and they just get the Lions. So if you're not going to watch it on TV, it's a phenomenal experience to go out there and experience it firsthand in the flesh.
Yeah, and of course we know that Warren Gatland won't be the head coach after leading the side on the last 3 occasions. Who would you like to see take charge, and would you be interested in being part of the coaching setup if you were asked?
That's a good question. I'm probably underqualified to be part of the coaching staff. I've only coached at international level as like an assistant for a year. Now I've crossed. I'm on the other side, as they say, in the broadcasting world. So, but I think you've got to look at the home nations. People who've maybe got some Lions experience in the past, and the 2 names that come to mind. You're looking at. Someone like Gregor Townsend, who was assistant on the last coach, Steve Borthwick, who's been an assistant, Andy Farrell, who's been a defence coach as well, an assistant coach at the Lions. Those 3 guys will all know what it takes and the pressure of a Lions tour. Andy Farrell has the most success as a head coach at international level, and he, I think, would be the obvious choice, but he's got a fantastic role at Ireland with one of the best teams in the world there, and they're building something special. Even though they might have fallen at the quarterfinal hurdle, they're going to be a force in world rugby for quite some time. So whether he wants to relinquish that role for the 6 to 12 month period that you need, a lot of conversations need to be had. But if you were picking it as a fantasy team now, Andy Farrell, I think would be the front runner, given the fact he's been on 2 tours. He was defence coach for the 2 tours that I was on, and without doubt one of the best coaches I've had.
Sam, it's been really brilliant to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Pleasure. You too. Thanks very much.